are here with Isaac the Sheep in the pre-exilic temple to talk about the book of Zechariah and the rise of apocalyptic prophecy in the period of the return from exile. We're here in the pre-exilic temple because the book of the prophet Zechariah is filled with temple imagery. We think that Zechariah was a Zadokite priest, and it's natural that his visions of the reign of God coming in power would be oriented around the structures, the architectonics, the iconography of the temple. The temple has not been rebuilt after having been destroyed by the Babylonians, but Zechariah's visions lead him to call for the rebuilding of the temple so God's reign will come. These objects, these sacramental icons, transfigure, they morph into the transcendent realities that lie behind them. In each of the visions, I'll give you a few examples in this short video, but you'd have to study the whole vision cycle in the first part of Zechariah, chapters 1 to 8, to get the entire picture. But this is part of what Apocalyptic is about. All of the ideals, all of the dreams spring into transfigured reality as the reign of God begins to intersect and invade earthly reality, bringing the world as we know it to an end and ushering in the reign of God. So what we'll see with each of the temple symbols that Zechariah sees morph into cosmic reality, what we'll see in each case is that the morphing is also associated explicitly in the Hebrew text with the ushering in of the reign of God and the conclusion of history. One of the initial visions is of the altar, but the horns not being erected, but smiths coming and chiseling them off. And the horns here are representative of power, the four corners of the universe that can rise up against the cosmic center. And their cutting off or defeat represents the defeat of the divine warrior of chaos in the end times. So that's a pretty neat symbolism right there. And it's interesting that the altar was always kind of a bi-directional locus of sacramental power. True, it emitted holiness, but equally true, it absorbed all of the sin and impurity and dispensed with it as the sacrifices were offered. So associating the horns both with safety, holiness, and life, but also with sin, uncleanness, and opposition is kind of a natural part of this two-way dynamism of the central altar in the temple structure. Another of the visions of Zechariah, as a matter of fact, the first night vision pictures these horses, God's own cavalry coming on the scene. And the prophet Zechariah says that he looks down into the ravine, which in Hebrew has to do with a cosmic abyss. And the ravine and the horses are among the myrtle.
The standard Jewish version, the NJPS, speaks of myrtles in the deep. The Hebrew behind this is Metzulah. Psalm 88:6 associates it with Sheol. Clearly, the temple's bronze sea has morphed into the cosmic deep. Our borders with transcendence have become thin, but the end is delayed. God's horse riders report that all is still quiet. The temple must be rebuilt first.
I am returning to Jerusalem with mercy. My house shall be built in it, says the Lord of hosts. And a surveyor's line shall be stretched out over Jerusalem.
Now the myrtle trees are very interesting. Palm fronds, hadassah branches were used at the Feast of Booths to form these booths. And in fact, we know from accounts such as the post-exilic Restoration era account in Nehemiah that when the temple actually was rebuilt, that booths were even set up in the temple courts as well as elsewhere in Jerusalem on the rooftops, outside of the city on the hilltops to celebrate the Feast of Booths.
It's fascinating that the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, is prominent at several points in an apocalyptic prophecy like the book of Zechariah, because from its beginnings, the Feast of Booths was an autumnal celebration of the enthronement of Yahweh.
The enthronement of God celebrated cyclically. And thus, at the end of Zechariah, at the end of the book, there is a major picture of, at the end times, all of the nations of the world coming and worshiping at the temple at the time of the Feast of Booths. So the Feast of Booths was really an apocalyptic event, or it became that in the post-exilic period. And thus it's not a coincidence that Jesus, when he comes as the apocalyptic Messiah, particularly in the Gospel of John, makes appearances at the temple during the Feast of Booths.
Jesus draws on the temple libation rites associated with the Feast of Booths and refers to the living waters that are mentioned in Zechariah, living waters flowing out from the temple, both to the Mediterranean Sea and to the Dead Sea. Jesus identifies himself as the ultimate source of such holy, living waters.
The book of Zechariah is filled with apocalyptic and eschatological end time messianic motifs and ideas that get built on in the Gospels.
Yet another major iconographic symbol in the temple that apocalyptically transfigures into a transcendent reality are the two big bronze pillars on the temple porch.
They morph into, or they transfigure into those pillars that hold up and support the earth, the roots of the mountains. And from between those mountains, at the extreme edges of the cosmos, come God's mighty chariot forces again. Just as horses were at the beginning of the Zechariah visions, so they appear at the end of the Zechariah visions. And at the end, they come with chariot force. And they go to the north and they defeat the powers of evil in the north, reminiscent of Ezekiel's prophecies against the northern foe, Gog of Magog. And they destroy evil in the north, according to this last vision of Zechariah. Let me give you just one final one that is also really cool. If you go inside the temple house proper here and into the Holy of Holies, you come to this rock, this Al-Sakra, ancient rock. You can still see it on the Temple Mount under the dome of the rock, the Islamic structure today. And on that rock, you can still see the indentations where it's very likely that the Ark of the Covenant was set when the temple was in place. Well, the book of Zechariah talks in more than one place about this foundational rock.
Both temple priest Joshua and Davidic head Zerubbabel must reckon with it. As the stone's many peacock feather eyes look on, Zerubbabel must deposit in it the inscription pointing to the Messiah.
This foundational stone is essentially the cosmic mountain morphing into reality so that the temple becomes again Zion. And the forces of aqueous chaos are stoppered as the rock stops up any attempt of Tehom, chaos, abyss, to come up and ruin life anymore. And the rock instead becomes the sure foundation for God's holy presence returning and establishing itself in the temple at the reign of God. This is kind of the stuff of Apocalyptic. This is the way that all of Israel's visions of cosmic shalom, harmony, stability, Eden, actually morph into reality associated with pronouncements and prophecies of the ending of history opposed to God and the coming in of God's reign, of the messianic reign. The book of Zechariah is an amazing book, and it's well worth exploring and digging into exegetically.
bad flamingo.